All right, gather around, folks. I've got a story that'll make you think twice about doing those late-night runs to Walmart. I'm Lucy, the night shift manager at a Walmart in a small town, and this is something that happened not too long ago. Trust me, it's still fresh in my mind. So it was a typical Tuesday night, and we were about an hour away from closing. The store was pretty much empty, just the usual last-minute shoppers grabbing whatever they forgot. I was doing my rounds, checking the aisles, when I noticed a familiar face. Mrs. Thompson. She was a regular, known for her quirky behavior and odd fashion choices. Usually harmless, but that night she seemed off. She wandered through the aisles, picking up random items, a pack of batteries, a single shoe, a jar of pickles, and then just abandoning them in the weirdest places. Like she'd drop a pair of socks in the freezer section or leave a can of soup in the toy aisle. It was strange, even for her. I decided to keep an eye on her through the security cameras, just in case. As I watched, she grew more erratic. She'd pick something up, stare at it intensely, then drop it like it burned her. Finally, she started making her way towards the employees-only area at the back of the store. That's when things took a turn for the downright creepy. She slipped through the door to the stockroom, a place no customer should ever be. I grabbed my flashlight and headed back there. The door was slightly ajar, which was weird because it's supposed to stay locked. I stepped in, calling out her name. "Mrs. Thompson? Ma'am, you can't be back here." No response, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of the store's PA system. I made my way through the stockroom, feeling more uneasy with every step. I checked the storage areas, the loading docks, nothing. Then I noticed something even stranger. The door to the basement, a door that should always be locked, was open. My heart was pounding as I shone my flashlight down the narrow staircase. "Mrs. Thompson, are you down there?" Silence. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs, the creak of the steps echoing in the darkness. The basement was cold and damp, filled with rows of shelves holding old merchandise and supplies. And there, on the floor, were some of Mrs. Thompson's belongings, her purse, a scarf, one of her shoes, scattered around like she'd been in a hurry to leave. But there were no signs of her. Just this eerie, unsettling feeling that I wasn't alone. I backed away slowly, trying not to let my imagination get the best of me, and rushed back upstairs. We called the police, and they came to search the place from top to bottom. They found nothing. No trace of Mrs. Thompson, no clues, just nothing. It was like she vanished into thin air. The official story was that she probably wandered off and got lost, but no one could explain the open basement door or why her belongings were left behind. The whole thing left me and my team rattled. Every night since then, whenever I walk past that basement door, I can't help but feel a shiver run down my spine, wondering what really happened to Mrs. Thompson. And if she's still down there somewhere lost in the dark. All right, let me tell you about the scariest thing that ever happened to me. It was a couple of years ago when I had just started working the night shift at a Walmart. You know how those places can get, especially at night, kind of eerie, almost deserted except for a few customers and the skeleton crew of employees. So I was the new guy, right? I had only been there a few weeks. The other workers were friendly enough, but there was always this weird vibe when we talked about one particular topic, a former employee named Carl. From what I gathered, Carl had been fired under some pretty shady circumstances. No one gave me the full story, just bits and pieces. Something about a fight with a manager and a threat made in the heat of the moment. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, workplaces have their drama, right? But then, weird things started happening during my shifts. I'd find items in completely wrong places, like a gallon of milk in the electronics section. Initially, I thought it was just customers being careless, but it kept happening, always in areas I knew I had already tidied up. Then, the lights started flickering. Not all the time, but enough to notice. I mentioned it to my manager, but he brushed it off, saying the store was old and had electrical issues. Still, it gave me the creeps. One night, I was stocking shelves in one of the quieter aisles when I noticed something written in the dust on a bottom shelf. It said, "I'm still here." My heart skipped a beat. I looked around, but there was no one there. Just me and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. The final straw was when I found a note in my locker. It was scrawled in messy handwriting and said, "You're next." I was seriously freaked out. I showed it to my manager, but he just laughed and said it was probably a prank by one of the other employees. But I knew it wasn't. There was something sinister about it, something personal. That same night, I decided to check the security footage myself. I had to know what was going on. I went to the security office and started going through the tapes from the previous nights. It was boring at first, just endless footage of empty aisles and the occasional customer. But then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the grainy footage, was a figure lurking in the back of the store. It was a man, but his face was obscured by a hoodie. He moved stealthily, almost like he knew exactly where the camera's blind spots were. I watched in horror as he placed the note in my locker. I had to confront him. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't go on working there with this hanging over me. That night, I stayed after my shift ended, hiding in one of the dark aisles. Hours passed, and I was starting to think maybe he wouldn't show. But then, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I peeked around the corner and saw the figure. I stepped out and shouted, "Hey, what do you want?" The figure turned, and for a moment, I was frozen with fear. It was Carl. He looked rough, like he'd been living on the streets. His eyes were wild, filled with anger and desperation. He lunged at me, but I managed to dodge him and ran to the front of the store, shouting for help. Security tackled him to the ground, and the police were called. Carl was arrested, and I found out later that he'd been hiding out in the store after hours, looking for a way to get back at the people who had fired him. The whole experience left me shaken. I couldn't sleep for weeks, and even now, every time I walk into a Walmart, I get this uneasy feeling. I'm a college student, working part-time at Walmart to make ends meet. My shifts are mostly at night because that's when they needed the extra help, and I needed the extra cash. It's usually pretty dead after 10 p.m., just a few randoms picking up stuff and us, the night crew, trying to keep everything stocked and neat. One night, I noticed this guy. He didn't look particularly weird or anything, just your average Joe, but something about him gave me the chills. He'd come in every night around 11 p.m., like clockwork. At first, I didn't think much of it. Regulars aren't uncommon. But then I started to realize he wasn't really shopping. He'd just wander around, occasionally picking up an item, but mostly he seemed to be watching me. I tried to shake it off, thinking I was just being paranoid. But then, it got weirder. I started finding these little notes in my locker and in my section of the store. They'd say stuff like, "You look tired, get some rest," or "Nice shirt today." Real specific things that only someone who had been watching me would know. Once, I even found a small, cheap bracelet with a note that said, "Saw this and thought of you." I was seriously freaked out, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I mean, who would believe me? So, I just kept my head down and tried to ignore it. One night, after my shift ended around midnight, I walked out to the parking lot, and there he was, leaning against my car. My heart was pounding. He smiled this creepy smile and said, "Need a ride home?" That's when I knew he'd been following me. He knew my schedule, where I parked, probably even where I lived. I tried to play it cool and said, "No thanks, my roommate's picking me up." But my voice shook, and he could tell I was lying. He stepped closer, and that's when I saw our security guard, Jake, coming out for his smoke break. I ran over to him, trying to act casual but clearly freaked out. "Hey, Jake, this guy's been following me. Can you help?" I whispered. Jake's face got serious real quick. He walked over to the guy and said, "Is there a problem here?" The creep tried to play it off, saying he was just a concerned customer, but Jake wasn't buying it. He told him to leave or he'd call the cops. The guy glared at me like really looked into my soul before he turned and walked away. We called the police and they managed to catch him down the street. Turns out he had a record. Stalking, harassment, the whole creepy package. They arrested him and I thought that would be the end of it. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that someone's watching me. Every time I walk to my car at night, I'm looking over my shoulder. Every stranger in the store makes my skin crawl. I've got a new job now, during the day, but the fear hasn't left. I guess it never really will. I was there with my son, Lucas. He's 4, full of energy and curiosity, just like any kid his age. We were going through our usual routine, picking up groceries and household items. I'm pushing the cart and Lucas is half sitting, half leaning out, grabbing anything colorful within his reach. We're in the cereal aisle when I first notice this guy. He's tall, scruffy, wearing a dark hoodie despite the warm weather. He's just standing at the end of the aisle, not looking at anything in particular. I get a weird feeling but shake it off. People do odd things all the time, right? We move on to the produce section. As I'm bagging some apples, I see him again, standing by the potatoes, just staring. Now I'm starting to feel uneasy. He's not shopping, just there. I tell myself maybe he's waiting for someone, but my gut says otherwise. Fast forward a bit and we're in the clothing section. I decide to try on a couple of shirts, so I take Lucas with me into the fitting room. He's playing with his toy car, making vroom vroom noises. As I'm changing, I notice something odd. There's this tiny hole in the corner of the fitting room mirror. I get closer, and my heart skips a beat. It's not just a hole, it's a camera, a hidden camera. I feel a rush of panic. My mind races. Who put it there? How long has it been there? I immediately get dressed, grab Lucas, and march out. I head straight to customer service and demand to speak to the manager. This isn't something you can ignore. The manager, Steve, comes over, calm and collected. I explain the situation, and he agrees to check the footage. We go into this small, cramped office with security monitors. He rewinds the tape from the fitting rooms, and there it is, clear as day. The scruffy guy in the hoodie placing the camera. My skin crawls. The footage shows him following us through the store, staying just close enough to watch, but far enough to not seem obvious. I feel violated, like we've been hunted. Steve immediately calls the police. They arrive, and I have to explain everything again. They review the footage, and within hours they catch the guy still lurking around the parking lot. Turns out he had more cameras and some pretty disturbing stuff in his car. He's arrested on the spot. The police assure me he'll be prosecuted, but it doesn't change the fact that I feel exposed. Vulnerable. Who puts a camera in a fitting room? After that day, things changed for me. I started feeling paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder whenever I'm out in public. Places that used to feel safe now give me anxiety. I installed cameras at home, double-checking every lock before bed. Lucas is too young to understand, but I'm hyper-aware of anyone who even glances our way. The incident left a scar, a reminder that there are people out there with twisted intentions. It's something I wouldn't wish on anyone. So next time you're out shopping, be aware of your surroundings. Trust your gut. You never know who might be watching. All right, let me dive into more detail because, trust me, this experience still sends chills down my spine. We were walking through Walmart on a normal day, nothing out of the ordinary. It was early, just after they opened, so the store wasn't crowded. This was my favorite time to shop because I could get in and out without much hassle. I first noticed the guy in the cereal aisle. He wasn't doing anything, just loitering. He had a scruffy beard and his hoodie was pulled up, which struck me as odd since it was a warm day. I shrugged it off, thinking he might just be waiting for someone. Lucas, meanwhile, was babbling about which cereal he wanted, completely oblivious. But as we moved to the produce section, there he was again. Just standing by the potatoes, not even pretending to shop. This time I felt a prickle of unease. You know that feeling when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? That's what I felt. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. But something about him felt off. When we got to the clothing section, I picked out a couple of shirts to try on. Lucas was getting restless, so I figured a quick stop in the fitting room wouldn't hurt. I chose a stall at the end, hoping to keep him entertained with his toy car while I tried on the clothes. As I was changing, I noticed this tiny hole in the mirror. At first I thought it was just damage, but then I saw the lens. My heart started pounding. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A hidden camera? In a fitting room? I felt sick to my stomach. I grabbed Lucas, who was happily oblivious, and rushed out. My mind was racing with a million thoughts. Who put it there? How long had it been there? And most terrifying of all, what had it captured? I stormed to customer service, trying to stay calm for Lucas's sake. I demanded to see the manager, Steve. He seemed taken aback by my urgency, but when I explained, he took me seriously. We went to this small office filled with security monitors. It was cramped, and the smell of stale coffee hung in the air. Steve pulled up the footage from the fitting rooms. We watched in silence as the scruffy guy from the aisles appeared on the screen. He glanced around before quickly installing the camera. My stomach churned as I realized he'd been following us, watching us. I felt like I was going to be sick. Steve called the police immediately. They arrived quickly, taking statements and reviewing the footage themselves. They assured me they'd catch the guy, and they did. He was still lurking in the parking lot, probably waiting for his next victim. They found more cameras in his car and some other disturbing items. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the day over and over in my mind. The sense of violation was overwhelming. I kept thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't noticed the camera. I started questioning everything. How many times had I been watched without knowing? How many places had cameras where there shouldn't be? I installed security cameras at home the next day. Every time I went out, I felt like I was being watched. I started avoiding crowded places, preferring to shop online or at smaller, less busy stores. I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. It was like a dark cloud that followed me everywhere. Lucas, thankfully, was too young to understand. He went on with his life, playing with his toys and watching cartoons. But I was changed. I was hyper-vigilant, always looking over my shoulder. The world felt different, less safe. I started carrying pepper spray and taking self-defense classes, anything to make myself feel more secure. Even now, months later, I still feel a pang of anxiety when I walk into a store. I scan the aisles, looking for anyone who seems out of place. I check the fitting rooms for hidden cameras, sometimes even in public bathrooms. The experience left a mark on me, a constant reminder that we're never truly alone. My name is Jake, and I used to work as a night security guard at a Walmart. You know, those late-night shifts, from midnight to sunrise, when the store was closed and silent. It sounds peaceful, but let me tell you, it wasn't always that way. It started as a normal week. I was doing my rounds, checking the aisles and ensuring everything was locked up. But then, one night, I noticed something odd. One of the back doors leading to the stockroom had a broken lock. I thought it might have been an accident, maybe a careless delivery guy, so I noted it down and reported it to my supervisor. The next night, things got stranger. I was patrolling the electronics section when I heard a faint clicking sound. It was almost like someone was trying to pick a lock. I followed the noise to the back of the store, near the loading docks. The lock on the main entrance was scratched up, like someone had tried to force it open. My heart was pounding as I stood there, listening to the night's silence, wondering if someone was still around. A few nights later, the signs of break-ins became more frequent. I found a smashed window near the automotive section and noticed a few items missing from the shelves. The eerie part was that it seemed like the thief knew the layout of the store well enough to avoid the security cameras. Every night the damages got worse, and I started hearing more sounds. Footsteps echoing in the dark, doors creaking open and closed. One night as I was checking the toy aisle, I heard a rustling noise behind me. When I turned around, nothing was there, just rows of stuffed animals staring blankly. But the sense of being watched was overwhelming. I was beginning to feel like the store was haunted. Then came the night that changed everything. It was around 3 a.m., the witching hour, and I was in the grocery section. I heard a loud crash coming from the electronics area. This time, I decided to confront whatever or whoever was causing these disturbances. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly made my way toward the noise. As I turned a corner, I saw them. A group of 3 men, all dressed in black, wearing ski masks. They were loading expensive electronics into bags. I froze for a moment, then one of them saw me. "Hey, there's the guard!" he yelled. Panic surged through me as I realized they were armed. One of them pulled out a gun and pointed it at me. "Don't move," he hissed. My heart was pounding, and I could feel sweat dripping down my back. I knew I had to act fast. With my flashlight in one hand, I fumbled for my walkie-talkie and managed to press the emergency button. The man with the gun started to advance toward me, but I stood my ground, hoping the police would arrive in time. The tension was unbearable. The 3 men were arguing among themselves, and I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew they were running out of time. I kept the flashlight trained on them, trying to stay calm, but my mind was racing. What if the police didn't get here in time? What if they decided to shoot? Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I heard sirens in the distance. The men heard them too, and they started to panic. The one with the gun looked at me, his eyes wild with fear and anger. But before he could do anything, the police burst through the front entrance, guns drawn, shouting commands. The thieves tried to run, but it was too late. The police tackled them to the ground and cuffed them. I stood there, shaking, unable to believe it was finally over. The officers praised me for my bravery, calling me a hero. But deep down, I was just relieved it was over. In the days that followed, the store beefed up its security, and I got a lot of praise from my supervisors. But the whole ordeal left me rattled. I couldn't shake the feeling of those men staring me down, the fear of that gun pointed at me. I still work at Walmart, but now every creak, every rustle in the dark makes my heart race.